The clatter of fine china and the low hum of self-important conversations filled the air at Aurelia, a restaurant where the price of a single entree could feed a family for a week. Julian Vance felt the oppressive weight of it all in his bones. Each polished fork he set down, each wine glass he filled, was a reminder of a life he once knew, a world that had chewed him up and spat him out. His crisp, white waiter's uniform felt like a costume, a cheap imitation of belonging. But it paid the bills. It kept a roof over his daughter's head, and for Chloe, he would endure anything. He would walk through fire. Serving overpriced scallops to hedge fund managers was nothing compared to that. He was clearing a table when the hostess led a new party to the restaurant's most coveted spot. The plush, semi-circular booth by the panoramic window overlooking the city lights. A woman with hair the color of spun gold, dressed in a sapphire gown that shimmered like a captured galaxy, laughed a sound like breaking glass. Beside her, a man with a jawline as sharp as his tailored suit placed a proprietary hand on her back. Julian's blood ran cold, his breath caught in his throat. It was Isabella, his ex-wife. The man was Marcus Thorne, a real estate mogul whose face was plastered on every business magazine. Julian had seen them in the society pages, a celebrated power couple. Seeing them here, in his section, felt like a meticulously cruel joke orchestrated by the universe. He ducked behind a service pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs. He just needed to trade sections. He could ask Maria to take the table. He could feign illness, anything but this. But it was too late. Her eyes, the color of ice chips, scanned the room with a casual disdain, and then they landed on him. A slow, venomous smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. She raised a delicate, diamond-encrusted hand and beckoned him over, not like a person, but like she was summoning a dog. "Well, well, well," she purred as he approached, his face a stoic mask he had perfected over years of hardship. "Look what we have here, Marcus. It's Julian." Marcus Thorne looked Julian up and down, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He saw a man in his late 30s, with tired eyes and the faint shadow of a beard, his frame lean from long hours and missed meals. He saw a servant. "Is this the one you told me about?" Marcus asked, not even bothering to lower his voice. "The project?" Isabella's laugh was sharper this time. "The charity case. Honestly, Julian, I'd heard you'd fallen on hard times, but this is just pathetic. A waiter. You used to have such ambition." Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the cheap fabric of his trousers straining. He kept his voice level, professional. "Welcome to Aurelia. May I get you started with some water?" "Oh, he's still so formal," Isabella mocked, leaning into Marcus. "It's adorable, isn't it? Like he's playing house. Tell me, Julian, what's her name? Chloe? Is she doing all right? I can only imagine what kind of life you're providing for her on a waiter's salary. Do you even have a 2-bedroom apartment, or does she sleep in the living room?" The mention of his daughter was a knife twisting in his gut. He thought of Chloe's bright, innocent face, of the way she'd hugged him that morning, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "She's happy," Julian said, his voice tight. "She's wonderful." "I'm sure she is," Isabella said with a dismissive wave of her hand, "but happiness doesn't pay for ballet lessons or a proper education. Marcus and I were just in Switzerland, looking at boarding schools for his son. The tuition is more than you'll make in a decade." She picked up the wine list, tapping a long manicured nail against a vintage that cost $4,000 a bottle. "We'll have this one. And Julian," she added, her eyes glinting with malice, "try not to spill it. I'm sure they'd garnish your wages for a lifetime." He retreated to the sommelier station, his body moving on autopilot. His mind was a maelstrom of fury and shame. This was Isabella's art form, finding a person's deepest insecurities and exposing them to the world with surgical precision. She hadn't just divorced him. She had tried to annihilate him, leaving him with nothing but their daughter and a mountain of legal debt. She had told the courts he was unstable, a failed dreamer incapable of providing. She had fought for full custody, not because she wanted Chloe, but because she wanted to take her from him. She had lost, a rare failure in her gilded life, but she had never forgiven him for it. When he returned with the wine, presenting the bottle as he was trained, Isabella wasn't finished. She waited until he had poured a taste for Marcus to approve. Then she opened her diamond-studded clutch and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She didn't place it on the table. She held it out between two fingers, forcing him to take it from her hand. "Here," she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "A little something extra for you, for Chloe. Go buy her a new coat or something. It must be so hard for you." It wasn't a tip. It was a branding. It was a public declaration of his failure and her magnanimous pity. The other diners were staring now, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Julian looked at the money, then back at her face, at the smug satisfaction radiating from her. He felt a cold, terrifying calm settle over him. The shame was burning away, replaced by something harder, something forged in the fires of betrayal and injustice. He didn't take the bill. He simply looked her in the eye, his gaze steady and unwavering. "We do not accept charity, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an iron vault. "Only what is earned." He turned and walked away, leaving the $100 bill hanging in the air between them, a monument to her cruelty. He could feel her rage, a palpable heat on his back. He didn't care. He walked into the kitchen, the swinging doors closing behind him, and leaned against the cool stainless steel, the sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar. He had endured the humiliation. He had not broken. But as he stood there, breathing in the scent of garlic and grease, he made a silent, solemn vow. This was the last time. Isabella Croft had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was humiliating a waiter. She had no idea she had just declared war on a king. The shift ended in a blur of forced smiles and polite nods. Julian drove his 10-year-old sedan, a car that rattled and groaned like an old man, to the small, clean apartment that was his sanctuary. The moment he opened the door, a tiny whirlwind of blonde hair and boundless energy launched itself at him. "Daddy!" Chloe squealed, her arms wrapping around his legs. The tension and anger melted from his shoulders, replaced by a wave of love so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. He scooped her up, burying his face in her hair, which smelled of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "Hey, my little star," he murmured. "How was your day with Mrs. Gable?" "We painted. I made you a picture of a space castle," she said, wiggling to get down and pointing at a colourful masterpiece taped to the refrigerator. He looked at the painting, at the lopsided towers and smiling yellow stars, and felt his resolve harden. Everything he did was for this little girl, every insult he swallowed, every long hour he worked. Isabella saw his life as a pathetic failure. She had no concept of this kind of wealth, a richness of the soul that couldn't be bought or sold. After putting Chloe to bed, reading her a story about a brave knight and a clever princess, Julian sat in the quiet dark of his living room. The city lights, the same ones Isabella had gazed upon from her throne at Aurelia, twinkled through his window. He pulled out his phone. It wasn't the cheap, cracked screen model his co-workers saw him use. This one was sleek, encrypted, and utterly anonymous. He scrolled to a single contact, a name saved simply as Sterling. He pressed the call button. It was answered on the first ring. "Julian," a calm, cultured voice said, "I was expecting your call. How was your evening among the proletariat?" "Enlightening, Arthur," Julian replied, his voice devoid of the weary deference he'd worn all night. The waiter was gone. In his place was a man of quiet, unshakable authority. Isabella was there. There was a pause on the other end. Arthur Sterling, a man in his late 60s, with the mind of a chess grandmaster and the loyalty of a Praetorian guard, had been Julian's mentor, his father's closest friend, and now the COO of his empire. "I see," Arthur said, his tone carefully neutral. "Did she cause a scene?" "She did what she does best," Julian said, staring out the window. "She tried to strip a man of his dignity in front of a crowd. She tried to use my love for my daughter as a weapon against me." "The woman has all the subtlety of a guillotine," Arthur sighed. "I assume this means our observation phase is over." "It's over," Julian confirmed, a chill in his voice. "I bought the Aurelia restaurant group 3 months ago to understand the service industry from the ground up for our hospitality portfolio. I've been working there for 6 weeks, learning, observing. I thought it was a valuable experiment in humility. But tonight it became personal. She brought my daughter into it, Arthur. She tried to mark Chloe with her stink of pity and scorn. "What do you want to do, Julian?" Julian stood up and began to pace the small room. "Isabella has a billion-dollar fortune. Her company, Croft Innovations, is the darling of the tech world. Where did it come from? She wasn't a genius inventor when I knew her. She was a master of social climbing and manipulation. Her entire empire sprang up out of nowhere 2 years after our divorce." "We've always been curious about that," Arthur said. "Her rise was meteoric, almost unnaturally so." "I want to know why," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "I want to know every source of her funding. I want to know the origin of her flagship product, the Helios Energy Core. I want to see her balance sheets, her investor reports, her private emails. I want to know who she bribed, who she stole from, and who she destroyed to build her castle. I want you to deploy the entire research division, spare no expense. I want to know every single dirty secret Isabella Croft has." "Consider it done," Arthur said without hesitation. "I'll have the preliminary team briefed and activated within the hour. We'll use the Onyx protocol, complete discretion." "Good," Julian said. He stopped pacing and looked at Chloe's drawing on the fridge. The space castle, a fortress of innocence. She made the mistake of thinking I was the same man she divorced, the struggling artist with his head in the clouds. She has no idea what I've become while she's been busy counting her money. She poked a sleeping dragon, my boy. "No, Arthur," Julian corrected him, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time that night. "She kicked it. Now she's going to see what it feels like to get burned." He ended the call and stood in the silence. The waiter's uniform was draped over a chair, a shed skin. Tomorrow he wouldn't be going back to Aurelia. The experiment was over. The real work was about to begin. Julian Vance, the humble waiter, was gone. Julian Vance, CEO of the ghost-like and formidable Vance Capital, a private equity firm that moved billions with the silence of a shadow, was back. And he was going to bring down an empire. The next morning, the 27th floor of a nondescript skyscraper in the heart of the financial district hummed with a quiet, intense energy. This was the nerve center of Vance Capital, an organization so discreet it didn't even have its name on the building directory. Here, data was currency and information was power. Julian, dressed in a simple dark grey suit that fit him perfectly, stood before a vast array of screens, a cup of black coffee in his hand. The tired waiter from the night before was a distant memory. His eyes were sharp, focused, and missed nothing. Arthur Sterling stood beside him, holding a tablet displaying streams of incoming data. "The team worked through the night," Arthur began, his voice a low murmur. "We've initiated a deep dive into Croft Innovations. Public records, SEC filings, patent registrations, the usual first sweep. On the surface, it's a fortress. On the main screen, the corporate structure of Croft Innovations was laid out like a complex web. It was a model of modern success. Stellar growth, glowing press, and a valuation that had skyrocketed into the 10-figure range. Their signature product, the Helios Core, was a revolutionary piece of technology. A miniature, hyper-efficient battery with applications in everything from consumer electronics to aerospace. It was the sole reason for the company's existence and its staggering wealth. The official story is that Isabella developed the prototype in her home lab. Arthur continued, swiping through the tablet. A classic Silicon Valley fairy tale. She secured seed funding from a few angel investors, and the rest is history. The patent for the core technology is filed solely in her name. Julian stared at the patent number on the screen. She couldn't invent a better way to open a pickle jar, let alone a revolutionary energy source. She didn't have a scientific bone in her body. Her talent was in identifying and exploiting the talents of others. He took a sip of his coffee. Who were the angel investors? "That's where it gets interesting," Arthur said, a glint in his eye. 3 of them. All of them connected to her new fiancé, Marcus Thorne. They invested early, when the company was little more than an idea on paper, and their initial $500,000 investment is now worth over $200 million. So Thorne was involved from the beginning, Julian mused. He didn't just stumble upon a successful billionaire. He helped create her. Dig into Thorne's finances around that time, see if there were any unusual cash movements. And I want to know about the engineers, The scientists she hired at the start. Someone had to build the thing. Already on it, Arthur confirmed. We're compiling a list of all early-stage employees. We're particularly interested in anyone who left the company under contentious circumstances. NDAs, wrongful termination lawsuits, anything that was settled quietly. A young analyst with sharp eyes and a nervous energy approached them. Mr. Vance, Mr. Sterling, we found something. He pointed to a section of the screen. The patent for the Helios core was filed on October 14th, 6 years ago. We ran a search for similar technology patents or research papers filed in the preceding years. And? Julian prompted. And nothing, the analyst said. It's clean, too clean. A technology this disruptive should have a trail. Precursor patents, academic research, failed attempts by other companies. The Helios core just appeared, fully formed. It's like it dropped out of the sky. Julian's eyes narrowed. He knew that look. The look of a history that had been deliberately scrubbed. That's because it wasn't invented. It was stolen. Keep digging. I want to know what existed before that patent. Look for unpublished papers, university research grants, even old forum posts by amateur inventors. Somewhere, someone was working on this before Isabella Croft put her name on it. He turned away from the screens and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him, a man in a suit, a man of power. But inside he was still the father who had to listen to his daughter being used as a pawn in a cruel game. The fury was still there, but now it was cold, channeled, a tool he would wield with precision. Arthur, he said, not turning around, I want to find him, the real inventor. I don't just want to ruin her, I want to restore him. I want the world to know who the real genius was. We'll find him, Julian, Arthur promised. And what about Isabella? Do you want us to begin financial maneuvers? Short the stock? Start acquiring a position through shell corporations? Julian considered it for a moment. No, not yet. A financial attack is noisy. She'll see it coming. She'll lawyer up, circle the wagons. I don't want to give her a chance to fight back. I want to walk into her boardroom with the executioner's axe already resting on her neck. We do nothing until we find the source. We move in silence. For the next 2 weeks, Vance Capital became a ghost, its immense resources focused on a single target. Teams of forensic accountants sifted through shell corporations and offshore accounts, tracing the flow of money that had launched Croft Innovations. Digital investigators, the best in the world, delved into the dark corners of the internet, searching for the ghost of an idea. They cross-referenced every engineer who had ever worked for Isabella, building a detailed psychological profile of each one. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. It wasn't in a corporate filing or a hidden bank account. It was in a dusty box in the attic of Julian's own home. He had been looking for an old photo album for Chloe when he stumbled upon a chest filled with his father's belongings. Elias Vance had been a brilliant man, a theoretical physicist who taught at a university, but he was always seen as an eccentric dreamer. His mind worked on a level most couldn't comprehend, and he filled dozens of notebooks with complex equations and strange diagrams. He had passed away 3 years before Julian and Isabella's divorce. Julian sat on the dusty floor, flipping through an old leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with his father's elegant looping script and intricate drawings. And then he saw it. It was a diagram, a circular device with interlocking energy conduits and a stabilizing core. The handwriting was his father's, but the design was unmistakable. Below it, scrawled in the margin, was a single word: Helios. The blood drained from his face. He frantically flipped through the pages. There were years of research, calculations, theories, the entire conceptual framework for the Helios core. It was all there, his father's life's work. And then he remembered. He remembered Isabella, years ago when they were still married. She had been fascinated by his father's work, always asking questions, always praising his genius. Julian had thought it was just her way of ingratiating herself with his family. He remembered her offering to help his father digitize his old notebooks, to preserve his legacy. His father, flattered and trusting, had given her everything. She hadn't preserved his legacy, she had stolen it. She had waited until he was gone, until Julian was at his lowest point during their brutal divorce, and then she had taken his father's dream and passed it off as her own. The billion-dollar fortune, the tech empire, the praise and adoration, it was all built on the tomb of a dead man. Julian closed the notebook, his hands trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. This was no longer about a personal insult in a restaurant. This was about the desecration of his father's memory. This was about a theft so profound it bordered on sacrilege. He picked up his encrypted phone and called Arthur. His voice was dangerously calm. "I've found him, Arthur," he said. "I've found the inventor." "Who is it?" Arthur asked. "Elias Vance," Julian replied. "It was my father. She stole it from my father." The line was silent for a long moment. Then Arthur spoke, his voice filled with a grim understanding. "Oh, Julian, that poor woman. She has no idea what's coming for her." The discovery of his father's notebooks transformed Julian's mission from a quest for revenge into a crusade for justice. The cold, calculated anger was now infused with the heat of righteous fury. He returned to Vance Capital not just as a CEO, but as a son determined to reclaim his father's stolen legacy. He laid the notebook on the polished obsidian of the boardroom table. His top team, Arthur, his head of legal, his chief of digital forensics, gathered around, their faces grim as Julian explained the situation. The air crackled with a new, solemn intensity. "This changes the objective," Julian stated, his voice ringing with authority. "Our primary goal is no longer simply to expose Isabella. It is to have Elias Vance posthumously recognized as the sole inventor of the Helios technology. We will bankrupt her, yes. We will dismantle her empire, absolutely. But we will do it in a way that leaves no doubt in the public mind about who the true genius was." His head of legal, a sharp-witted woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, a fact that always amused them, spoke first. "The notebooks are a phenomenal find, Julian, but they are circumstantial. Isabella's lawyers will argue she developed the idea in parallel. They'll call it a coincidence. We need a smoking gun, something that directly links her to these specific documents." "She offered to digitize his work," Julian recalled, the memory now tasting like ash. "She must have created files, scans, PDFs, something. If we can find a digital footprint of these notebooks on a server or a hard drive she owned back then, we can establish a direct chain of custody." The forensics chief, a young prodigy known only as Hex, cracked his knuckles. "Give me access to her digital life from that period, and I'll find it. Old cloud accounts, university email servers, decommissioned laptops. People think they can delete things. They can't. Not really." The plan was set in motion. While Hex and his team began their digital archaeology, Arthur focused on the human element. "We need someone from the inside," he said to Julian in private. "Someone who was there at the beginning of Croft Innovations, someone who might have questioned the official story of Isabella's garage invention." Their search for disgruntled employees had already flagged a name: Dr. Aris Thorne, a brilliant but cantankerous physicist who had been Croft Innovations' first chief technology officer. He had left the company abruptly just before its public launch, signing a rock-solid NDA and disappearing into a quiet university professorship. The official story was that he and Isabella had creative differences. He was paid a 7-figure sum to walk away and keep his mouth shut, Arthur reported, showing Julian the file. It was an exorbitant amount for an employee who had only been there for 10 months. It smells like hush money. "Find him," Julian ordered. "Don't approach him directly. Observe him. Understand what he values, what his leverage points are. If he knows the truth, he's lived with it for years. He won't be easy to convince." While the hunt for the smoking gun continued, Julian initiated the first subtle phase of the financial assault. It wasn't a direct attack. It was more insidious. Vance Capital, through a labyrinth of shell companies and international subsidiaries, began to buy up the debt of Croft Innovations' key suppliers. They acquired controlling interests in the logistics companies that handled their shipping and the refineries that produced the rare earth minerals essential for the Helios core. On the surface, nothing changed. But slowly, silently, Julian was taking control of Isabella's entire supply chain. He was wrapping his fingers around the arteries of her company. When the time came, all he would have to do was squeeze. Meanwhile, Isabella Croft was living the life of a modern queen. She was the toast of the tech world, a celebrated female entrepreneur who had shattered the glass ceiling. She and Marcus Thorne were planning a wedding that was being billed as the social event of the year. Her days were filled with magazine photo shoots, keynote speeches at tech conferences, and lavish parties where she accepted the fawning praise of a world that adored her. She had completely forgotten about the encounter at Aurelia. The waiter, her pathetic ex-husband, was a trivial footnote in her grand narrative, a momentary amusement. She was untouchable, insulated by $1 billion and a wall of public adoration. She never once looked over her shoulder. She had no idea that a silent, invisible army was meticulously dismantling her world, brick by brick. The breakthrough came a week later. Hex, looking triumphant after a 72-hour non-stop session, called Julian and Arthur into the forensics lab. "Got her," he said, pointing at a screen filled with code. It was buried deep. She used her old university cloud storage account. She must have thought it was long deleted. But universities never delete anything. "I found a hidden, encrypted folder dated 7 years ago. Took a while to crack, but Merry Christmas." He clicked a file. On the screen, a high-resolution scan of a page from Elias Vance's notebook appeared. And then another and another. It was the entire journal digitized. The file's metadata was a prosecutor's dream. The creation date, the user ID tracing back to Isabella's student account, even the IP address from which it was uploaded, the coffee shop just 2 blocks from Julian's old house. Eleanor Vance looked at the screen and smiled. "That's not a smoking gun, Julian," she said. "That's the whole ballistics report. We have her." Almost simultaneously, Arthur received a call from the team observing Dr. Aris Thorne. The physicist, it turned out, had a crippling weakness. His daughter was suffering from a rare genetic disorder, and the experimental treatment she needed was not covered by insurance and cost a fortune. The university salary was barely enough to keep them afloat. Julian looked from the digital evidence on the screen to the file on Dr. Thorne. All the pieces were in place. It was time to stop moving in the shadows. It was time to set the trap. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice calm and steady, "contact Dr. Thorne. Don't threaten him. Help him. Set up an anonymous grant through one of our philanthropic foundations. A medical research grant. Pay for his daughter's entire treatment, with a stipend for their living expenses. No strings attached." Arthur raised an eyebrow. And then, Julian said, a predatory gleam in his eyes, "after he sees the first payment clear, you will arrange a meeting. Tell him a benefactor who admires his early work on energy fields wants to speak with him. He'll take the meeting. He'll be grateful. He'll be ready to listen." "And what about Isabella?" Eleanor asked. Julian turned to face his team. "Phase 2 begins now. We start squeezing the supply chain. Delay a few shipments of raw materials. Create some logistical hurdles. Nothing that will bankrupt her overnight, but enough to get her attention. Enough to make her nervous. Then, Eleanor, you will draft a letter. An unsolicited acquisition offer from a shell corporation based in Switzerland. Offer to buy Croft Innovations for a generous premium over its current market value. She'll never sell," Arthur pointed out. "Croft Innovations is her identity." "I know," Julian said. "I don't want her to sell. I want her to be arrogant. I want her to feel powerful when she rejects the offer. I want her to be sitting on top of the world, completely blind to the fact that I'm about to saw the legs off her throne." The plan was audacious. It was a multi-front war, fought with data, money, and human psychology. As the team dispersed to execute their orders, Julian remained in the boardroom. His father's notebook still open on the table. He traced the elegant lines of the Helios diagram with his finger. The trap was set. The queen was in her castle, admiring her riches, unaware that the walls were about to come crashing down. The first tremors were subtle, easily dismissed as the normal friction of a global business. A critical shipment of refined cobalt from Africa was delayed, stuck in customs due to a sudden, inexplicable paperwork issue. A fleet of cargo trucks carrying components from a domestic supplier was rerouted because of a supposed bridge closure, adding 3 days to their delivery time. Production at Croft Innovations' primary assembly plant slowed by 12%. Isabella Croft, from her opulent corner office with its commanding view of the city, was irritated but not alarmed. She berated her COO over the intercom, demanding he fix the incompetence in her supply chain. She saw these as logistical headaches, not as the opening salvos of a targeted attack. Then came the letter. It arrived via a high-end international courier, its envelope thick and bearing the wax seal of a Zurich-based investment firm she'd never heard of. Argentum Holdings. Inside, on crisp, watermarked paper, was an unsolicited offer to acquire Croft Innovations in an all-cash deal for $1.3 billion, a 30% premium over its current valuation. Isabella laughed. She called Marcus Thorne, her fiancé, and read the letter to him, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Can you believe the audacity? They think they can just buy my life's work. They think I'm for sale." "It's a sign you've made it, darling," Marcus cooed over the phone. "When the silent money comes knocking, you know you're a true player. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to frame it," Isabella declared, "and then I'm going to send them back a single-word reply, no, with a few expletives thrown in for good measure." She felt invincible. The supply chain issues were a minor annoyance. This buyout offer was an affirmation of her power. She was Isabella Croft, the visionary, the creator. She was in control. What she didn't know was that Julian Vance was listening to a recording of that very phone call. Vance Capital's digital warfare division had compromised Marcus Thorne's phone weeks ago. They knew everything. They heard her arrogance, her dismissiveness. It was exactly what Julian had predicted. "She's taken the bait," Arthur Sterling said, standing beside Julian in the listening room. "She feels untouchable." "Good," Julian replied, his expression unreadable. "Let her enjoy it for a little while longer." The next move came from Dr. Aris Thorne. The first payment from the anonymous grant had appeared in his account, a sum so large it had made him weep with relief. His daughter's treatment could begin immediately. A week later, he received the invitation to meet his mysterious benefactor. They met in the quiet, wood-paneled library of a private club, a neutral territory chosen by Arthur. Aris was a nervous man, his eyes darting around the room. He was expecting a wealthy eccentric, perhaps an elderly philanthropist. Instead, he was greeted by Arthur Sterling, whose calm demeanor was both reassuring and intimidating. Arthur didn't waste time. "Dr. Thorne," he began, "my employer is a man who values integrity and genius above all else. He believes a great injustice was done, both to you and to another greater scientist." Aris paled. I don't know what you're talking about." "I signed an agreement." "We know," Arthur said gently. "We also know that the Helios core was not invented by Isabella Croft. My employer knows who the real inventor was. And he has proof." Arthur slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a scanned page from Elias Vance's notebook. Aris stared at it, his breath hitching. He recognized the handwriting, the specific notations. He had seen these designs before. "Isabella showed you these, didn't she?" Arthur pressed. "She brought you his research and asked you to build a working prototype from it. She paid for your silence when you realized what she was doing." Aris Thorne finally broke. The guilt he had carried for years, mixed with the overwhelming gratitude for his daughter's lifeline, came pouring out. "Yes," he whispered, his head in his hands. "She told me it was her father's research, that he'd left it to her. I built the first 3 prototypes based on these exact schematics. By the time I realized she was filing the patents in her own name, claiming it all as her own work, it was too late. I was in too deep. She threatened to ruin me, to blacklist me from the entire industry. The money, she offered me enough money to disappear. I took it. I was a coward." "You were a man in an impossible position," Arthur corrected him. "But now you have a chance to make it right. We are going to expose her. We need your testimony, a sworn affidavit detailing everything you just told me." "She'll destroy me," Aris stammered. "She won't have the power to destroy anyone," Arthur assured him. "By the time your name is mentioned, her empire will be a smoking crater. My employer will protect you. He will ensure you are hailed as the man who brought Elias Vance's genius to light. Your reputation will be restored, and you will never have to worry about money again." Aris looked at the tablet, then seemed to look through it, at the years of his own compromised integrity. He thought of his daughter, now with a chance at a healthy life. He nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need me to do." With Eris Thorne's affidavit secured, Julian now held the axe. The final piece of the plan was to corner Isabella, to leave her with no way out. The logistical hiccups in her supply chain were escalated. Key shipments didn't just get delayed, they vanished. A fire, small and quickly contained but causing significant water damage, broke out in her main warehouse. A crucial supplier, now secretly owned by Vance Capital, declared bankruptcy overnight, cutting off her supply of a vital component. Croft Innovation's stock began to wobble. Production ground to a halt. Retailers complained of unfulfilled orders. The glowing press turned anxious, then critical. For the first time, Isabella felt a flicker of real fear. Her COO was useless, her board was panicking, and Marcus Thorne was suddenly distant, his calls less frequent. That's when the second letter from Argentum Holdings arrived. This time, it wasn't an offer, it was a statement. It detailed with chilling accuracy the catastrophic failures in her supply chain. It mentioned the impending production collapse and the Q4 earnings report that would be a bloodbath. And then it made a new offer. $800 million. The price was dropping. The letter ended with a simple, ominous sentence. We suggest you reconsider. Our offer will not remain on the table for long. Isabella was trapped. Her company was bleeding, its value plummeting by the day. The $1.3 billion offer she had arrogantly laughed at now seemed like a dream. Selling for $800 million would be a humiliation, but the alternative, total collapse, was unthinkable. She instructed her assistant to accept a meeting with the representatives of Argentum Holdings. She would go in, project strength, and negotiate the price back up. She would salvage her dignity and a handsome fortune. She was still Isabella Croft. She would not be defeated. The meeting was set for the following Friday in a neutral rented boardroom on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. It was the very same building that housed the secret headquarters of Vance Capital. As she rode the elevator up, dressed in a crimson power suit, she rehearsed her opening lines. She felt the familiar thrill of a high-stakes negotiation. She was walking into a boardroom to save her company. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. The boardroom was a study in minimalist power. A single massive table of polished granite sat in the center of a room enclosed by floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a godlike view of the city below. Isabella Croft strode in, her heels clicking with authority on the marble floor. She was expecting a team of Swiss bankers, old men in grey suits. The room was empty, save for two figures standing by the window, their backs to her. One was a distinguished, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit. The other was just a man. Tall, lean, dressed in a simple dark suit. As they turned, Isabella's confident smirk froze on her face. Her blood turned to ice water. The older man was a stranger, but the other one, it was Julian. He wasn't the weary, downtrodden waiter from the restaurant. This was a different man entirely. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a calm, lethal intensity. His eyes, which had been dull with shame that night, were now sharp and clear, and they held her gaze with an unnerving stillness. He looked like he owned the room, the building, the entire city sprawling beneath them. "Julian," she stammered, confusion warring with a rising sense of dread. What are you doing here? Are you catering this event?" The insult was automatic, a reflex, but it came out weak and uncertain. The older man, Arthur Sterling, stepped forward slightly. "Ms. Croft, my name is Arthur Sterling. I am the COO of Vance Capital. And this," he said, gesturing to Julian, "is Julian Vance, our founder and CEO. We are Argentum Holdings." The name Vance Capital meant nothing to her. It was a ghost, a phantom in the financial world, just as Julian had designed it. But the reality of Julian, her pathetic failure of an ex-husband, being the CEO of the firm, trying to buy her company, was so absurd, so impossible, that she could only stare in disbelief. "This is a joke," she finally said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "A pathetic, elaborate joke. You hired these actors, you rented this room, all to get back at me for a little spat in a restaurant? My God, Julian, I knew you were pitiful, but this is a new low." Julian didn't rise to the bait. He simply walked to the head of the table and gestured for her to sit. "Please, Isabella, sit down. There is no joke. His calm was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. She hesitated, then sank into one of the heavy leather chairs, her bravado beginning to crumble. All those problems you've been having, Isabella, Julian began, his voice even and measured. The shipping delays, the supplier bankruptcies, the fire at your warehouse, that was all us. We have been systematically strangling your company for the past month. The stock price, which has dropped 37%, is about to fall off a cliff. Your company is worthless. The $800 million offer was a courtesy. It has since been rescinded. You're lying, she hissed, though the color was draining from her face. You can't. A waiter can't do that. I haven't been a waiter for a very long time, Julian said, but I do want to thank you. Your little performance at Aurelia was the catalyst I needed. You reminded me of exactly who you are. Arthur Sterling placed a tablet on the table in front of her and swiped the screen. An image appeared, a scanned page from a notebook covered in familiar, elegant handwriting. Do you recognize this? Julian asked. Isabella stared at the screen. It was a page from Elias Vance's journal. It's research from my father-in-law, she said, trying to sound casual. He was a brilliant man. His work was an inspiration for me. An inspiration? Julian's voice dropped, the calm giving way to a cold fire. Let's call it what it was, Isabella. A theft. You took a dead man's life's work, a man who trusted you, and you put your name on it. Arthur swiped again. A video file began to play. It was Dr. Aris Thorne sitting in a lawyer's office giving a sworn videotaped deposition. He detailed everything, how Isabella had brought him the research, how he had built the prototype, how she had threatened him and bought his silence. Isabella's facade shattered, the blood drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of pure shock and horror. Aris, that bastard. He's not the bastard in this story, Isabella, Julian said. He's a good man you corrupted. But we have more. Arthur swiped the screen again, showing the forensic report from Hex, tracing the digitized notebooks directly to her old university account. We have the original notebooks, Julian continued, his voice relentless. We have the digital trail. We have the sworn testimony of your first CTO. We have complete control of your supply chain. We have acquired a majority of your corporate debt. Croft Innovations is a hollow shell, and I own every piece of it. You are ruined. Isabella was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with panic. What do you want? She whispered, her voice trembling. Money? I'll give you money. How much? It was never about money, Julian said, standing up. He walked over to a large, industrial-looking machine that had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room. It was a high-capacity document shredder. Arthur placed a thick stack of documents on the table. It was a portfolio of bearer bonds and stock certificates, representing the entirety of Isabella's liquid assets, her personal fortune, which she had been forced to leverage to try and save her failing company. The debt holders, all controlled by Julian, had demanded she sign it all over as collateral. It was the final move in his financial checkmate. The documents represented just under $1 billion. You built your entire life on a lie, Julian said, picking up the stack. You valued this, he shook the portfolio, over everything, over integrity, over family, over your own daughter. You tried to humiliate me by waving a $100 bill in my face, by trying to make me feel small because I didn't have this. He walked to the shredder and turned it on. The machine whirred to life with a hungry, grinding sound. Isabella shot to her feet. No, she gasped, her voice a strangled cry. No, Julian, please, don't. That's everything. That's my life. No, it's not, Julian said, looking her directly in the eye, his gaze filled not with rage, but with a profound, sorrowful pity. It's just paper. Your life is the daughter you ignored, the man you betrayed, the legacy you desecrated. This is just the consequence. He fed the first stack of bonds into the machine. The shredder screamed, devouring the certificates and spitting out a confetti of worthless strips. Isabella shrieked, a raw animal sound of pure agony. She lunged forward, but Arthur Sterling stepped in her path, a silent, immovable wall. Julian continued feeding stack after stack into the shredder. He didn't rush. He made her watch as her billion-dollar empire was turned into a pile of meaningless garbage on the floor. The sound of the grinding blades was the only sound in the room, a mechanical death rattle for her entire world. He shredded her fortune, her power, her identity, right in front of her face. When the last certificate was gone, he turned the machine off. The sudden silence was deafening. Isabella had collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with tremors. She was no longer a queen. She was just a broken woman in a crimson suit, staring at a pile of shredded paper. "The press conference is scheduled for 3 o'clock, Julian said quietly to Arthur, ignoring Isabella completely. "We will announce that Vance Capital has uncovered evidence that the Helios technology was, in fact, the work of the late Elias Vance. Dr. Aris Thorne will be there to corroborate the story. My father will finally get the credit he deserves." He walked to the door, pausing for a moment. He looked back at his ex-wife, a woman he had once loved, now a stranger drowning in the ruins of her own making. "By the way, Isabella," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Marcus called us this morning. When we showed him the evidence, he was very cooperative. He's already issued a statement distancing himself from you. The wedding, I'm afraid, is off." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply walked out of the room, with Arthur following behind, leaving Isabella Croft alone with the shredded remnants of her stolen fortune and the deafening silence of her complete and utter ruin. In the weeks that followed, the story of Isabella Croft's downfall was spectacular and brutal. The press conference, led by a poised and resolute Julian Vance, sent shockwaves through the tech and financial worlds. The evidence was so overwhelming, so irrefutable, that there was no defense. Dr. Aris Thorne's tearful public confession, combined with the presentation of Elias Vance's original notebooks, painted a damning picture. Isabella became a pariah overnight. The media, which had once celebrated her as a feminist icon and a business visionary, now savaged her as a fraud, a thief, and a ghoul who had stolen from a dead man. Her name became synonymous with corporate deceit. Marcus Thorne publicly denounced her, painting himself as yet another victim of her elaborate lies. Her friends vanished. Her invitations were rescinded. Her world, once a glittering stage, became a prison of shame. Stripped of her fortune and facing a litany of civil lawsuits, she was forced to sell her lavish penthouse, her collection of sports cars, her designer wardrobe, every trapping of the life she had worshipped. She was left with nothing. The last Julian heard, she was working as a receptionist at a small suburban law firm, living in a rented room, a ghost haunted by the life she had lost. But Julian's story was not about her destruction, it was about restoration. The name Elias Vance was resurrected from academic obscurity and placed in the pantheon of great 21st century inventors. Universities established scholarships in his name. The Helios technology, now under the stewardship of a new company founded by Julian, was rebranded as the Elias Vance Corps. All profits from the technology were funneled into a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting young, underfunded scientists and inventors, ensuring that no other genius would have their work stolen or forgotten. Julian never returned to the boardroom of Vance Capital in the same way. He had proven his point. He had reclaimed his family's honor. Now his focus shifted entirely. He delegated most of the day-to-day operations to Arthur and his trusted team, and dedicated himself to what truly mattered. One sunny Saturday afternoon, months later, Julian was not in a skyscraper overlooking the city. He was in a public park, pushing his daughter Chloe on a swing. Her laughter, pure and joyful, was the only stock market he cared about now. She was chattering about her day at school, about the picture she drew of a space castle, about the wobbly tooth in her mouth. "Higher, Daddy, higher," she squealed with delight. Julian smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. He pushed the swing, sending her soaring towards the blue sky. He was no longer Julian Vance, the humiliated waiter, nor was he Julian Vance, the avenging CEO. He was just Daddy, a father who had walked through fire for his child and emerged on the other side, not scorched, but purified. He had faced down the woman who tried to break him and had dismantled her billion-dollar empire. He had shredded her fortune not out of a love for destruction, but to prove a point, that some things have no price. Integrity, honor, a father's love, a daughter's laughter. These were the true currencies of life. The shredded paper in that boardroom had been nothing but a symbol of a hollow life. This, right here, the simple joy of a child on a swing, was real wealth. And it was a fortune no one could ever take from him.